What's your story? My name is Ian Currey. Come on, let me tell you what I think. Do you like a good story? There's nothing quite like a good book with a suspense-filled story, is there? As a boy, I remember finding a copy of a book called The Wooden Horse. I had no idea what it was about. It had no pictures, but the idea of a wooden horse sounded fun. So I took it along with me on a holiday to the south of England. The book turned out to be about a couple of prisoners in World War II who hid inside a vaulting horse. And they did that every day and then dug a tunnel out from under it. The story actually took place in the same prison camp that the much more famous story that was made into the well-known film The Great Escape took place. It took me just a page or two to realize this was a real live true story and it wasn't at all made up. Being mechanically inclined, I had to try to draw what was being described to see how it would all have worked. How did two men fit inside a horse? Much more recently, I found another copy of the same book, and this time it had illustrations showing me how the men were transported inside that vaulting horse, and how the tunnel mouth was out in the middle of the yard. My drawings were very similar, so the book must have been very well written with its descriptions. I was hooked. I started reading one afternoon and somehow managed to read under the bed covers all the way through to the next day. Have you ever got into a good book like that and you just can't put it down? A well-told story is something rather special, isn't it? You may remember me telling you in a recent video how I have a new job. Well, that job now is a few weeks underway already, and one of the fun things we've been doing is getting to know the other team members. It's rather a large team, and so we found a way of telling our story in about 90 seconds. Each of us takes a turn and we tell our story. And we do that whenever we're together, and that helps us get to know new people. Having only 90 seconds means we have to think. We think about the important and most interesting things that we'll tell that will help our colleagues remember something about us. And they can do that a little bit quicker when we're all having the same amount of time. Everyone has a story. Some of us are in the middle of a chapter in our story, while others are trying to work out where the next part of the story begins. Recently too, in these videos, I've been telling you a few of the stories that I remember from my childhood. I think that might be something older people start to do. Perhaps I'm getting older. But I could go back, not just to my childhood, but earlier than that. Do you remember how I told you I sometimes visited my grandmother in Tufnell Park in London? Well, whenever I was with her, I would ask her, "Nana, tell us a story. Nanny, tell us a story." And she couldn't see very well, so she couldn't read books, but instead she told us stories that were real. At the time we thought they were made up, but later found out that no, these stories were real. Now in Nana's house there was always the smell of cooking. One day when we arrived, we asked, "What's cooking?" And she said, "Brumus buns." And we had no idea what she was talking about, Brumus buns. But we enjoyed eating the rather hard cake buns. They weren't very sweet and were quite small, and later we think they probably just hadn't risen or they were missing an ingredient. But the story that day was that these buns were first made for a special polar bear. And the bear had been born in London polar bear in London, not long after the war, and he'd become a huge attraction at the London Zoo. Everyone loved the bear. Now the bear's name was Brumus, and millions of visitors went to see her. Now, was Nana telling us a made-up story, or was this real? For many visits to come, Nana told us about Brumus. It turns out that Brumus was a celebrity, but the part we didn't know was that Brumus died a few years before I was born. Now, when Brumus died, it was a sad day in London. Turned out that Nana had made batches of these buns to cheer the people up in the street, and that's how this particular kind of bun got to be called Brumus buns. Now, most people in England would have no memory at all of Brumus at all. Certainly not all these years later, but I do. So how do I know about Brumus the bear, even though I wasn't there? Well, this week I've been reading what Joel had to say, and you'll see that. And Nana's story works right into that because of the idea presented there. Tell your children about it in the years to come, and let your children tell their children. Pass the story down from generation to generation. Now, this particular part of the Bible is talking about a fierce plague that took over the land and wrecked things. It actually reads like a horror science fiction thing, with cutting locusts and hopping locusts and several other kind of locusts all at the same time. It sounds horrible, doesn't it? But the whole story, not just the bad parts, have to be remembered. At the end of the story, Joel is asking the people he's talking to pass on the story that ends with, in that day mountains will drip with sweet wines, and the hills will flow with milk. The good and the bad parts of our story we may be in right now, even with locusts perhaps, well, that'll pass, and then the rest of the story will be very different one way or another. But real life stories, the ones we're in right now, today, well, those can be very difficult, can't they? And how the end of the story plays out is as much to do with attitudes and actions that we decide to take to steer the story as anything. So how do we do that? Now, there's a lovely idea hiding in the New Testament. Let me show you. God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well. Now, it would be easy to look at this and say, yep, God gave us the skills and gifts we need to get where we're going and write the story. But look again. God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. The point here is to serve one another. Writing our story, especially in the middle of a difficult time, is actually relatively easy. But who are we helping? Who are we serving along the way, even when our story is especially hard? What story do you want to be able to tell when what is going on around you right now is just a story in your past to tell? Serving one another sometimes seems overwhelming, but how we handle that will define a page-turning story for the future, and one not to be forgotten. Oh, and in our house, every now and then, when cakes don't work out well, but are still very edible, I think of Brumus, the polar bear, who had cakes named after her. Until next time, goodbye.